Hi, I'm Lisa T and I'm here to share another wellbeing tip. This month I'm going to talk about our brains and I'm going to cover three different elements. First of all, understanding why our brains work in the way that they do. Second of all, having an awareness of this when it's happening. And third of all, being able to reframe that and take some of our control back and decide where we want our focus to be. So whilst talking through these three elements, I'm going to use an example that's quite relevant in the music industry for a lot of us musicians, and I'm going to use the example of comparing ourselves to others. So quite often we might find that we are overthinking certain things. We might be thinking about other people having more of a following than us, or we might be checking their monthly listeners and things like that. So I'm going to use that example and I'm going to start with, first of all, understanding our brains. So when we're doing something like that, we might end up being a bit hard on ourselves. Why am I thinking like this? What's wrong with me? And I just want to explain that firstly, it's kind of the job of the brain to act in that way. So without getting too technical, we have something in our brain called the amygdala. And this is responsible for detecting any kind of danger or threat that could be harming us. So this is quite well understood in the form of fight or flight that you may have heard of. So when the amygdala does sense some kind of threat, we have a matter of milliseconds to decide whether we're going to stand and fight or flight and get away from it. And although that's very well accepted in things like anxiety and immediate instant dangers, we have to remember that that same process is always going on in our brain for every single situation in our lives. So if our brain thinks that it's important for us to be assessing and analysing why somebody else has more of a following than us, that's just our brain doing its job, first of all. So having the understanding that there's nothing wrong with us if that's what is happening is the first step. The second step is awareness. So once we have that awareness and we realise that we're doing it, that is when we have the power to change it. So in that moment, when we realise I'm overthinking this, that's when we become present to what we're doing and we have the choice. We can either continue to put our energy and our focus on something that we know isn't helpful and we know isn't useful, or we can decide to move on to step 3, which is to reframe. And that is when we think, right, I'm going to reframe this and I'm going to use my energy in a more useful way. So instead of scrolling and looking at how many monthly listeners they have, or maybe using my mental energy thinking about it, I'm going to use this time instead to build my own following. I'm going to make a couple of new connections on Twitter or whatever it might be. Basically, energy can only be in one place at once. So if we're focusing our energy, whether it's mentally or physically, on something that we know is unhelpful, it's not going to get the results we want, because we need to consciously reframe that and bring our focus and our energy into something that is going to be beneficial and useful for us. So just remember those 3 things, and I hope